some members of the media, more liberal outlets that have been in the past providing cover for Jay Inslee and Democrats who voted for this policy, are now starting to acknowledge that, yes, in fact, the carbon tax is leading to the increase at the pump. The Seattle Times had an article. I didn't love some elements of the article. It said, while gas prices top nation as lawmakers take aim at oil industry profits. I hate that headline because it acts as if oil industry profits are the problem, which, as we'll explain momentarily, is not. But in the article, they acknowledge a March invoice reviewed by the Times showed that an oil company had added a line item listed as cap at the rack, a reference to the state's new program of 52 cents per gallon of diesel purchased by a fuel distributor, which trucks wholesale fuels to gas stations, construction companies, and homes around the state. That amount is similar to estimates from industry and academic sources. So an acknowledgement that the estimates that conservative think tanks gave for what the carbon tax would do is spot on for what it's doing. So that acknowledgement from the Seattle Times. Also, shock of the century, Crosscut, which is a very progressive news publication in Seattle, published an article that, again, tells the truth about why you're seeing the high gas prices at the pump. I guess better late than never. The article from John Stang is headlined, Why Washington Gas Prices Are the Nation's Highest. In it, he writes, referencing Todd Myers, Myers noted that a gallon of gasoline produces 1/100th of a metric ton of pollution. With auction prices hovering around $50 per metric ton, the math translates to a 50-cent increase per gallon if all the costs are passed on to drivers, he said. And then John Stang brings in a liberal voice. He says, Yoram Bauman, you can put that back up, Nicole, Yoram Bauman, a liberal economist from Salt Lake City, Utah, which in 2016 tried and failed to pass Initiative 732 to establish a different cap and trade program, coupled with a 1% drop in the state sales tax, agrees with Myers' calculations. Bauman, again a liberal economist, said I-732 supporters expected cap and trade costs to be passed on to consumers at the pump. Quote, the idea that the oil companies are going to suck it up is not in the realm of possibility. So now that most people are debunking and rejecting the claim from Governor Jay Inslee that the carbon tax is not going to increase prices at the pump, now that he can no longer spew that without people telling him that's a lie, what does he do? Oh, well, he has to move on to another lie because that old lie isn't working anymore because people can see what's happening at the gas pump. And so what is Governor Jay Inslee's new lie? Well, he has been trotting out the new lie of, oh, this is the result of the greed of oil companies. And in fact, I think it was he first uttered that line on Cairo 7. We played this clip before, but I want to play it again for you. The first time Jay Inslee switched to his new lie.
Well, what I would say is the author of these gas prices are the oil and gas companies, and their rapaciousness, their greed is beyond imagination. They're making 80 cents a gallon profit on every gallon. That is 20 times higher profit than in other states. And I think the legislature needs to look at this issue to restrain some of this price gouging that's going on. Now, I also think there's ways to restrain the cost to the oil and gas companies by having a combined market for pollution credits with California and Quebec. So I think we need some further action on this to restrain some of these rapacious policies. But we are not going to go backwards on making polluters pay. Our kids should not have to breathe this pollution.
But would you agree that this could be a direct result of the oil companies passing the amount of money that they have to pay to the state on to you?
Yes, there is some of that. Now, much of it is not related to this law because the oil companies have shut down a major pipeline, allegedly for maintenance, although why they do it in the summer, I don't know. That has restrained supply, and that has been a significant reason for these recent cost increases. It's not all this law.
So anyway, so he moves on from this law isn't going to increase gas prices to, okay, this is increased gas prices, but it's not the fault of the policy. It's the fault of the greedy oil companies because they are raking in record profits and they're just letting all of us poor schleps suffer at the pump. So Todd Myers, who was right about everything, remember, right about it all. And it took the mainstream media about 2 years to actually agree with the fact that Todd Myers was right from the very beginning about what the carbon tax would do to you and I at the pump. So Todd Myers is like, okay, let me fact check, since the mainstream media refuses to do it, the governor's latest claim. And the claim, frankly, from a lot of Democratic lawmakers that, oh no, it's just oil companies being really, really greedy and passing too much cost, more than they need, onto consumers. So this is the latest article from Todd Myers with the Washington Policy Center. Governor's latest excuse for increasing gas prices is wrong, according to his own source. So we invited Todd Myers back on the show to debunk Governor Jay Inslee's latest lie. Todd Myers, welcome back to Undivided.
Thanks for having me on. It's good to join you.
First, I should say congratulations, because it seems like the mainstream media is finally starting to come around to your side of things.
Sort of. There are certainly some. There are others who continue to find excuses. But yes, we're making progress.
Yeah. So your latest article, Governor's latest excuse for increasing gas prices is wrong, according to his own source. So let's set this up for people for a moment, because, of course, there was the denial, right, from the governor and the Department of Ecology that their cap and trade program would even raise gas prices. Well, now gas prices are going up. So their secondary excuse is, well, that has to do with the greed of oil companies. You're saying that also is not true.
Yeah, so now that they've sort of had to admit that prices are going up faster than Oregon and Idaho and other places, it's like, well, why? So, of course, they find somebody else to blame, and it's easy to blame the oil industry. The fundamental thing they haven't explained is why the greed of oil industry happens to stop right at Washington's border. But nonetheless, they have a statistic that they have cited from a group called the Oil Price Information Service, OPIS, which is actually owned by Dow Jones. So Dow Jones has a number of sector-specific analytical groups. This is the one for the oil market. And what they say is that what they claimed is that oil company profits in Washington state are higher than almost anywhere else in the country, over 80 cents a gallon. Now, I didn't know what the truth was, but your BS detector goes off when it's like 80 cents a gallon is a lot of profit for a product that is between $4 and $5 a gallon. So I did something the governor did not, something that others like Senator Wynn and Representative Rommel did not. Climate Solutions, which is an activist group, I reached out to Opus and said, what does this number mean? Because it's very confusing to me. And what they said is that instead of it being oil company profits, it's not the oil company and it's not profit. It is gas stations, and it is the margin that they mark up between the purchase of wholesale and what they sell at the pump. So that's how much gas stations take per gallon. And all of their expenses have to go into that, including rent, labor, credit card fees, all those sorts of things. So the governor, who has the entire Washington state government at his fingertips, didn't have a single person actually check to see what that data meant before he went on TV and made the claim.
Well, of course not, because that would counter the governor's narrative. And also, if I'm reading into this, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but when you talk about all the things that have to go into that price for gas station owners, isn't that also an indictment of how expensive it is to run a business in Washington state?
Yeah, I think, prices are higher in Western Washington than in Eastern Washington for a variety of reasons. One is rent and property taxes and all those other things are going to be higher. The costs of labor are going to be higher. One of the things that I didn't realize was credit cards. Credit cards take about 3%. So if your cost is $5 a gallon, well, that's 15 cents. So now, 80 cents a gallon, now you're 85 cents a gallon, you're down 15 cents. That's a big chunk. So there's a lot of different things that go in there. But again, it's not the oil companies. Even stations that are branded Chevron or Shell or things like that are owned by a local person, not by Chevron or Shell. But most gas stations are like Costco, Fred Meyer, Safeway, things like that. That's the amount that they have to do that. So yes, business costs in general indicate, contribute to that high margin. The other thing that's interesting is that they're actually selling fewer gallons of gas. So as they sell less, the the margin has to go up because their overhead costs are essentially fixed. So you have to make up all those overhead costs on fewer gallons. So that drives the margin up. So the irony is that an increasing margin may actually indicate less profitability because it shows that, that you're struggling even more to make up your overhead costs. And that's actually what we've seen is that profitability per station has gone down this year. Now, my interest is in the market. I want a good, efficient market. Companies and other folks, they can figure out their own profitability. I want to make sure that people are getting the best price, but claiming that gas stations or oil companies are somehow making more profit in Washington state than elsewhere just is wrong by their own source.
So you've been right on all of this. You guessed what the increase would be from the carbon tax almost to the penny. You've started to see some mainstream outlets acknowledge that, yes, that is the case. So now that you're saying and you're providing the analysis to back it up that, no, this isn't a result of gas and oil greed, do you think that the governor's office will be forced or will they willingly back away from that claim?
So what I have already seen is a shift in their messaging. So for instance, Senator Joe Wynn, who's the chair of the Energy and Environment Committee in the state Senate, has already changed his message. And so there was an article in the Seattle Times where he wants a new law that looks at oil company profits. And his message there was, we have no idea how much profit they're taking. Well, that completely contradicts the statement from a week ago where they claimed to know down to the penny how much profit they were taking.
Right. How can you say it's a result of oil company greed and profit if you're now saying you don't know?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So it's just, even if what they say is 180 degrees opposite of what they said yesterday, all right, the theme is common, which is it's somebody else's fault and we need more government. So they just compound the problem. Now, I have long said that, we should do things to, reduce CO2 emissions, to reduce the risk. But the things we're doing now, we find the way to do the most expensive and least effective ways consistently. And then when that turns out to be the case, they just double down on those bad ideas. And it's really frustrating. I wrote an entire book about positive things we can do. That's what we should be talking about is here's empowering things that we should do, right? Time to think small, which is small rather than big government. And I sort of get tired of having to constantly fact check the nonsense that we see coming out of Olympia and out of the governor's office and things like that. But people want to do something for the environment and they're grasping for that. So when they hear these things, they're inclined to believe it. So I have to keep fact checking, but really what we ought to be doing is turning to ways to actually be effective. But unfortunately, the state of politics in Washington state, we're not there. We're still stuck on the blame game. We're still stuck on politics. We're still stuck on division because that works politically.
Yeah, and the reason you have to keep fact checking is because nobody else will do it apparently, or else I don't think we'd be in this position. And it's not too much to ask of them to simply own the policy and the consequences of it. So Todd Myers with the Washington Policy Center, we appreciate your time and we appreciate your fact checking.
Thank you very much. It's always nice to chat with you.
Yeah, and it goes without saying, a think tank should not have to be the one fact checking these things, right? I mean, I don't think that we would have been caught so off guard by, and I think by we, I mean sort of most of the populace that gets their information from the mainstream media. I don't think it would have been such a surprise for folks to see gas prices increase in the way that they did had the media really forced honesty from Jay Inslee, from the Department of Ecology, from Democrats from the very beginning, and not been so quick to believe what was being spouted. I mean, remember we showed a King 5 headline from just a couple months ago when the gas prices had already increased like 45 cents. And they were still following that line from the governor saying, oh, but it's not us. It's not that policy. And so how people's tunes have changed now that public opinion is like really wanting to get to the bottom of what's going on is pretty absurd. It's pretty ridiculous.